In this chapter, we're going to be talking about aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Now, you might be familiar with demand and supply from the microeconomic standpoint, but we take those concepts and we extend it to the macroeconomy. And so this is, I believe, one of the most important and most fascinating chapters in macroeconomics. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about various facts about short-run economic fluctuations. You might have heard the economy is sometimes in a recession, sometimes in an expansion. We'll talk about those fluctuations in the short run, and we will try to distinguish between the economy in the short run versus the economy in the long run. And we will construct a model of aggregate demand and aggregate supply to explain these economic fluctuations in the short run. We will also look at what causes economic fluctuation. So looking at the economy and looking at what is going on in the economy is fascinating in and of itself, but when you want to explore reasons or causes, this becomes a little more complicated, and we will look at those types of causes for economic fluctuations. So as we know, economic activity in any economy can fluctuate from year to year, and in most years the production of goods and services rises. This is typically because there are increases in the labor force. So you could have increases in the labor force, or you could have increases in the capital stock, or you could have advancements in technology. And all of these things, these good things, lead to the economy being able to produce more and more over time. Okay, so this type of growth of goods and services allows everyone to enjoy a higher standard of living, if that happens. Now, in the United States, over the past 50 years or so, the US economy has had about 3% of real GDP growth annually. Okay, now this number might be much higher for countries like India or China who are developing, and much lower for developed economies. Okay, because they're already at that developed stage, so these numbers tend to be lower. But for economies that can see that are developing, these numbers tend to be a lot higher. Now let's try to take a look at what happens to real GDP over time, and what does that look like for the United States. So let's go to the Federal Reserve Bank of Economic Database, and here what you see for the United States are two lines over time. One is the blue line, which is our real GDP, measured from 1998 until now. And the red line is the real potential gross domestic product. And that potential gross domestic product is the red line, which is showing sort of the long run trend of GDP. And notice that the blue line is not always on the red line. Sometimes the blue line, let's say in this area right here, right around 1999, if you think about that, the blue line is above the red line. So we are above the long run trend of real GDP, and in some cases we are below the long run trend. And this typically happens when we're below, this typically happens during or after a recession, which are these gray shaded bars that you see. So we had a short recession in 2001, and we had a pretty long recession, almost like a depression, in 2007, between 2007 and 2009, which was called the Great Recession. Okay, so you see that real GDP sort of fluctuates around this red line, which is the long run trend. So sometimes we have expansions. So any region in the white zone that you see, these are expansions. The economy is doing better than its long run trend, and sometimes it is doing worse, which are these short recessions that we have, okay, where the real GDP falls below. So let's go back and think about these terms that we just introduced. So we've seen that the economy can be expanding, the economy can be depressed or stagnating. And so this brings us to these three terms: expansion, recession, and depression. Now, expansion is just when real GDP growth is positive. Okay, which would say that if the growth rate of real GDP is positive, whether it's 0.5% or 3% or 6%, the economy is growing. Okay, and typically we would be above our long run trend if the economy was expanding, or at least we would be, for the most part, we would be above that. Now, a recession is typically a period of contraction of the economy where you see the growth rate of real GDP become negative. The real GDP growth rate is negative for 1 to 2 quarters. Okay, so they measure real GDP and they look at the growth rate quarter on quarter, and economists would then be able to say if we had 2 consecutive quarters and we had negative growth, then we are in a recession. Now, a depression is just a severe recession. Okay, so this could last a long period of time. You've heard about the Great Depression between 1929 and 1933. You've also seen the Great Recession between 2007 and 2009, where there was a deep recession that the US economy, in fact, many economies in the world faced. So this is just a deeper recession.